Welcome, everybody, to American Zarathustra. This is episode 31 of Imperium Art. We are very happy to have Kiz Kardassian today with us. How are you today, Kiz?
I'm doing very well, actually.
Wonderful, wonderful. And also would like to welcome back my friend and co-host, the host of White Art Collective's Conversations with the Wind, Gaia Snellis. How are you?
Hello, everybody. Hello to the audience. Hello, Donald, and welcome, Kiz.
This is a very special episode because it's our first time having a pregnant guest on our show. So congratulations, Kiz.
Thank you.
So
I didn't realize that was a milestone.
It's a milestone, absolutely, and something to celebrate. How many weeks are you?
Thank you. I'm going to be 24 weeks in a couple of days, so a little over halfway there. Very exciting stuff.
I don't know, do you know if it's a boy or a girl? Or
Yes, we are expecting a little girl.
Lovely, lovely, wonderful. Well, we're so happy for you, and congratulations.
Thank you. It's
yes, congratulations.
Thank you. It's actually really amazing. I've been obviously wanting to be pregnant for a very long time. And it's very funny because I found out I was pregnant during a time of like emotional turmoil. And it was like I found out I was pregnant and I was like, oh my God. And it was like everything just melted away and like nothing mattered.
Beautiful.
Except like totally focusing on bringing this child into the world with like as little negativity and stress as I could muster.
Sure. I understand that, your entire physiology is affecting the baby. And so kind of, staying positive is actually a really important thing to do right now.
Mm-hmm.
Difficult time to do that in, but...
Well, I'm kind of, I suppose, lucky in the sense that I'm like relentlessly positive and have been like I guess it's just like my temperament.
Great. I had Joy K on American Zarathustra. It wasn't under the Imperium Art banner. And the main question, or generally the big question for her was, how do you stay positive? What's it about? That is, I would say, inborn into her character, but how do you stay positive? What's your angle?
In general, I've spent a lot of time in my life thinking about cycles. Everything works in a cycle. And even like I remember being younger and like going through times of pain and just thinking like, this is just this part of the cycle. It will come back around and more good is coming. So that's kind of how I've maintained the positivity, just because today kind of sucks and it's okay to feel bad about today sucking. It's like the seasons, right? You always know summer is coming around, basically.
Yeah. And, as you're in winter, you look forward to spring. So it's, I guess everything has its time. So tell us more about yourself and the content that you produce.
Great. So, yes, I am Kiz Kardassian. Funny story behind the name. It's not actually funny. I just say it's funny because it was really funny to me at the time. So I used to live in a ghetto with my roommate. It was cheap lodging and I didn't want to live with my parents was basically the reason I was there. Because you know how like the modern Western mode of thinking is like if you turn 18, like you're a loser if you still live at home. So kind of regardless of what the situation is, you move out and away from your parents. So anyway, I was living in the ghetto and foolishly around, I don't know, like it was an ungodly hour. I went out to go play Pokemon Go with a friend. And it was too late. And the ghetto that I lived in, I lived basically on the line of the Hispanic and the Black ghetto. And so we went out for a walk, and as we were coming back, we walked by these three black guys sitting in the doorway of a pub, smoking cigarettes, whatever, and they were catcalling me. And well, I've always been a shit poster. I am co-host of Monday Night Shitpost. It's the show I do with my husband. And so I was kind of like shitposting in response to them, like talking loudly about things that didn't have to do with them, like in response. But they were drunk, so they didn't really understand what I was doing or what was going on.
Okay.
So they ended up following us for like a block or two. And it got to the point where I turned around and I was like, no, I shouldn't have said this. I know I shouldn't have said this. In retrospect, it was a very poor decision. But I turned around and I said, do you think it's funny to follow a white girl in the ghetto at 2 a.m?
Wow.
And they jumped us.
Charming.
So I ended up getting punched in the face, which I'm kind of glad in a weird way, because being in the ghetto, you don't know if people have weapons on them. Like, they really could have pulled out a knife and stabbed us, or like, you know what I mean? Like, you hear all these horror stories from Europe or like other ghetto areas in the country. Like, I was pretty lucky to just be punched. And anyway, I get home and just the flood of adrenaline and emotions and like crying and freaking out, obviously. They ran away right after I hit the ground, because I think they realized that we weren't actually prepared for a fight. But also they were drunk and they probably didn't realize that they had the reaction they had. Who knows? But I got home and I look in the mirror and like my makeup is running down my face and my hair's all messy because, you know, I just got into a scuffle. And my top lip is like wicked puffed out. And the first thing I thought was, oh my God, I look like Kim Kardashian.
So that's the origin of the name. So that.
Yeah. And I just thought it was, at the time, I just thought it was really funny because, you know, I looked like her, but it was for a completely different reason. And
Yeah.
so I just took on the name as like a reminder to, you know, kind of watch what you say.
Not walk alone or not walk in the ghetto at night. You know?
Yes, not walk in the ghetto at night is probably a really good place to start. And I never did again, actually. I moved out pretty soon after, which had nothing to do with that incident in particular, but obviously it had a lot to do with it. Like,
Yeah.
I told
It's kind of.
my
It's
family and friends that if I ever saw a Muslim in the neighborhood, I was moving. And
Yeah.
then the next week I saw a woman walking down the street in a niqab, like the head to toe.
Right.
And I was like, bro, I live on the line of a Hispanic and a black ghetto, and now there's like a Muslim woman in a niqab, which means that that's like a fundamentalist Muslim woman. Nah, I'm out of here.
Good. Yeah, that opens up a massive can of worms. There's a lot of, discussions we could break off into from there, but I want to focus a bit more on your show and what you do in your show, the guests, the themes, the everything.
Sure. So real quick, I decided to keep with the name Cardassian though, because well, it's also kind of a play on Star Trek too. Like they're you know, like a race of aliens that are very much about their own and doing whatever they can to protect their own. But I also decided to keep it, even though people started pronouncing it Kardashian. That wasn't the intent, but it doesn't matter. I decided to keep it because, well, part of what White Art Collective is doing is taking back our culture.
Yeah.
And I figured, you know, if I kept this highly recognized name in the culture and I can shift people's associations with that name, then that would be like my piece of reclaiming our culture. Taking a popular name, and instead of people thinking of some high-class bimbo, they'll think of some of the things that I do about like reclaiming our, you know, our arts.
Yeah, there's something. I would say that there's a lot of people in the white positive sphere, former alt-right, that do kind of funny plays on names. That's pretty common. So in our culture, I think it's, people can see that and say, oh yeah, I get it. There's, you kind of spoofing a name there, but knowing the story behind it and all that, it's pretty crazy. I'm curious about more like the mission of your show and what is it that, what are you accomplishing with your show? What are maybe some highlights or things you're proud of?
Oh, sure. So I wrote some of this stuff down. So I have my own personal channel that I'll talk about in a second. And then I basically share a channel with my husband. And the main show on that channel is called Monday Night Shitpost. And basically what we do there is, well, we find like silly news stories to laugh at because we're all, for the most part, a lot of us are always watching the news and it's very discouraging. So, Nick, my husband, will find stories that are really ridiculous, like woman in Florida arrested and they found like an alligator in her pants, or like something really silly like that.
Yeah, yeah. That
So
happens
that's
all the time with Nullis, though.
what? I'm sorry.
I'm making a joke. I just said that's what Nullis does for fun on weekends.
Oh, nice. Alligators in the pants.
Yeah, he and I banter and goof around all the time. Go on.
That's awesome. Or like there was another story where a cop pulled this woman over and she had a bag of heroin, but she decorated it like a hair bow, like a bow in her hair. And it's just like, you really think the cop isn't gonna notice your drugs because you decorated it?
Right, right.
So just really silly things like that. Kind of just, to relax. You know what I mean? Like your
Yeah.
life doesn't have to be so intense and uptight all the time. You
Mhm.
can laugh every once in a while.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think that's sort of a coping mechanism for a lot of people, and probably a healthy one. If you're able to find humor in this stuff,
mhm.
Anyway, continue.
So for my personal channel, I have 3 separate shows.
Mhm.
I have the Cringe Bingo show that I do on Wednesday. And basically, the point of that is it all stemmed from this realization I had a little while ago, where it occurred to me that it is the role of women to create and maintain our communities. And one of the ways that women do that is they are constantly reminding themselves and each other of standards of behavior. So women are ultimately the gatekeepers of behavior.
Mm.
And that has been demonstrated multiple times throughout history. I think it was World War I. It was the women handing men white feathers in order to call them cowards for not going to war.
Whoa.
So I forget what most of that story is, but that was the basic gist of it. And there were quite a few men who actually committed suicide because they couldn't handle the shame of being called a coward.
Ouch.
And so our enemies have gotten really good at weaponizing women's gatekeeping of behavior. The whole body positive movement is all like healthy at any size, and that is um, women's standard for behavior being subverted, and that's the standard of behavior that they're enforcing. Whereas women shouldn't be we shouldn't be body positive in that way,
Hmm.
right? I think real body positivity is recognizing that there is a problem and then working to fix it, constantly making yourself better. I think body positivity is like, if you do find yourself overweight, like there's nothing wrong with admitting that you messed up, that you made a mistake, or that you don't know how to take care of yourself. But in that admittance, you have to be able to grow from that and learn from that.
Mm.
And the way that women's gatekeeping of standards in that way has been weaponized is like, they're not using shame to force people to introspect anymore.
Mm.
They're allowing people to cope in like really unhealthy ways.
Mm.
So for Cringe Bingo, basically what we do is we watch these weirdos and these fatties and these Antifa on TikTok,
Yeah.
and they do their weird behaviors and their dances, and they talk about their ideas, and we mock them as a way of reinforcing our standards of behavior,
Yeah.
because gluttony is bad for you,
Mhm.
and um, coping coping with like cigarettes and alcohols and foods and addictions is not good for you. Like I said, there's this quote from something I saw in a meme. It's it's okay. How does it begin? It's not wrong to find yourself as weak, but it is wrong to stay weak.
Hmm.
And so I really like when people work on themselves and work towards betterment. I'm forgetting the exact term right now because pregnancy brain, but
No, I get that. I actually think you're bringing up a huge conversation that needs to be had, I guess, in our sphere.
Mhm,
The whole, I mean, even for men, there's this whole Chad thing, and you got to have the sculptured abs and the big jaw and all, all this very stuff.
mhm,
So I feel like a lot of that has to do with age too, like where you're at in life. If you're in your 20s, everybody's trying to hook up and or find a mate, or there's a lot of testosterone, there's a lot of that going on, and so it's very different from when, say, you're in your 30s and you've had a child or two, and
mhm,
you're thinking more about business and buying a home and da 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 and other things.
mhm,
So there's phases, like I guess, that people go through, but getting even deeper than that is this whole question of coping with the stress of modernity and how sort of like the foods and the things that are available or affordable are garbage, and how kind of difficult it is to just live a normal healthy life these days.
mhm. You brought up another thing that I guess I had wanted to touch on a little later.
Mhm.
With like the whole Chad meme, I
Yeah,
think some people get really hung up on memes,
yeah.
and it's like the meme is really just meant to invoke a response.
Hmm.
And if you're chasing the meme, like if you're trying to become the meme,
Oh,
it's I think that is really unhealthy as well.
right.
But I can talk about that a little more in depth later because I had kind of planned on it.
Okay. Okay.
But
Just
moving on.
wanted
Oh,
to
go.
tell us if you had any responses to any of this so far.
Well, this is fascinating because this whole issue of the male-female dynamic in our community, in our spheres, is a constant debate and argument, which I find superfluous, to be honest with you. Personally, I think that it should be an organic, natural understanding between the man and the woman, and how we evolve and develop, and how we complement each other. I think that should be the message that we're spreading. But then people spiral into various debates.
Yeah.
But you bring up a very important point, Kiz, about the nurturing nature of the female,
Mhm,
the maternal power of the female, that is a part of our, specifically our European, our white tradition, where the mother is a very important part of the morality of the individual, of the community. They're always providing some kind of uh, a lesson. They're the ones who raise the children, essentially, in that sense. So
mhm,
there's a power there that has been taken away
Yeah.
and weaponized against us.
mhm,
And I fully agree. So what you're doing is phenomenal, actually, by mocking, and we need humor, to be quite honest with you, because many times I think that we take ourselves a bit too seriously. And so, when I have those alligators in my pants, it's just. But all jokes aside, I really think that we do need humor. We need to have some fun, but we also have to take ourselves seriously. And then this transitions into the meme aspect, and we can talk about that later, obviously. But it's what you were saying. Chasing the meme is like when the guy takes a joke and he like turns it into something cringy, basically.
mhm,
Like if you're in a community of friends, and then, like, let's say five guys, we're all joking around, we're talking about something, and then that sixth guy says something really awkward. That's when you're chasing the meme.
mhm,
Mm.
And so you got to be careful, to understand the message and the meaning of what is being said. So this is really fascinating. And again, to everyone in the audience, we should not be fighting with each other about superfluous topics. We should find ways to complement each other as male and females. And I think by doing that, we find that we have a lot more in common than we realize.
Hmm. So tell us more about your show and your themes on your show, Kiz.
Sure. So the next one that I have on Fridays is I do Radio Kiz, where it's basically a song request stream. I really enjoy interacting with the audience, so having them send me music is a really fun way to interact. Um, this kind of ties into why I really like the White Art Collective.
Mm.
I've noticed that when people get red pilled,
Yeah.
they reject a lot of the things that they liked previously because, well, their vision is colored by the new information they have received about the things that they previously liked. And so they reject their hobbies and they reject the things that they liked. And I don't think that that particularly serves us very well, because then we concede the ground to the enemy, right? We just let them take it over. And so what White Art Collective does is they continue, or what I perceive is they continue to embrace their hobbies, but they do what the left does is they sit squarely in their hobby and they like put their elbows out and they plant themselves there. And they enjoy the things that they enjoy and they create it in a way that's not subverted.
That's really, really nicely put. And I think what you're acknowledging is how natural and I don't know how to put this. It's like to outsiders, it looks bold and shocking and explicit that, you're celebrating being white, whereas to us, it's just an organic and natural thing. You're just being yourself, frankly.
Mm.
And it's quite lovely. I'm really curious about this sort of programming where you have people sending you songs. So in a sense, the audience is DJing the show.
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Yep, pretty much.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I have an international audience, so I'll get like I'll get like Norwegian metal, and then the next song will be Finnish polka, and it's really quite interesting.
Exciting. That's cool. And what time is that show on?
Oh, that's Fridays, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Okay, on DLive, correct?
Oh, yes, correct. I am an exclusively DLive streamer. I'm not a fan of the censorship on YouTube. As far as I know, the federal government has started regulating YouTube because YouTube messed up and admitted that they collect data on minors.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
It does
so
surprise me though in some way.
yeah, and I'm not a fan of Twitch because, well, Twitch has the reputation of either being communist or indecent female streaming.
Ouch. Okay.
So,
I'm glad you told me that. I was considering starting a Twitch just to live stream me doing art in my studio. I know that a
as
lot.
long as you don't talk about politics, you might be able to get away with it.
Okay, that's tough to say.
Donald, you can always start an OnlyFans site too.
Oh, goodness.
Then I'd have to show my face, and then my intense handsomeness would just destroy the internet. So I can't.
Oh, gosh.
But yeah, very humble. No, that's not my world over there. But anyway, back to you.
Yes, I have one more show that I do on Saturday mornings, usually 10 a.m. Eastern Standard. I call it my Tradcraft streams, and I put Tradcraft in quotes because sometimes it is like traditional crafts that you would think of, like knitting or crocheting. I have done that. In fact, this past week, I made a cast iron panhandle cover
Wow.
because Nick got me a cast iron pan for Christmas.
Hmm.
And I didn't want to keep draping a cloth over the handle. So I was like, you know what? I have this skill. I do crochet. I can just make one.
That was big. I loved that. I actually saw you post that, and I thought I would love to see people post more of their handicrafts.
Yeah. And that is actually the point of the crafting streams is we have gotten, well, I'll just say because I don't know how much of your audience is like in my culture of having grown up in a city completely disconnected from your roots. Have grown up where everything you can think of, you can just buy at the store.
Yeah.
And so knitting and crocheting is a relatively new skill for me. And I picked it up because I was talking to a few women, Mother Hen, if anyone's heard of her, and Boudica, who is also a streamer on DLive. We're talking about what if shit hits the fan?
Hmm.
Um, how are you going to be useful? And I've also been thinking, like, about women's usefulness to the family and their community. Um, so I picked up knitting and crocheting as a way to be useful to my family. How did that begin? Oh, yes, because I don't want to work.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, if I'm not working, I need to find ways to supplement my income, right? So, what's the point of women working? Well, they tell us that the point of women working is so that we can afford food and clothes and other items around the house. Well, if I'm not working, how do I supplement that income? Well, if food is one of those things, well, I can garden,
Yeah.
so I can supplement some of the vegetables that we have to buy throughout the year. Eventually, I would like to have some chickens, so like I don't have to buy eggs, stuff like that. And then the whole idea of like clothes and comforters and like all of that stuff, like if I have these skills, then I don't need to buy the item, I can just make it.
Mm.
And then we would save money that way. And once you start thinking like that, you can actually think of a lot of other ways to supplement your income. It's like once you figure that one thing out, it's like the
Yeah.
floodgates open and you're like, oh, I have all these ideas. And then, of course, you can look back on European history, like what did women do, right? With sewing and knitting and crochet. Like there's so many useful skills. I mean, Boudica makes her own soap and she makes her own jam and like I'm not saying that every woman should be able to do all of these things, but the whole point of having a community is if you get really good at one skill and you're surrounded by other people who have skills and are really good at these other things, then you don't necessarily need money to acquire these things. You can just trade your time and skills for them.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love the homesteading culture you're talking about. I want to share something with you. My mom and my great grandmother, they did a lot of knitting, crocheting, crochet, etc., all that. And
Mhm.
as a child, I had sweaters and mittens and hats, and there was an enormous uh, emotional value, like a nostalgic
Mhm.
value to these items that we hang on to and treasure. So there's more to it than just like the utility of it. There's also the kind of family heirlooms, and there's a culture, etc. So I commend you on what you're doing with that. I think that's great.
Yeah, I was talking to Mother Hen about I was talking to Mother Hen and Boudica. We were talking about like making your own things. Like I am making my baby's first blanket, and there is something deeply satisfying about knowing that my baby's blanket, right, is something that I made. I am keeping my child warm.
Beautiful.
And like there's just something, I don't know, there's no other way to explain it. It's just deeply satisfying knowing that something I created is,
Mhm.
that useful and meaningful in the world.
Marvelous. And in your world, which is
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. Do you find that women in our sphere are very much interested in crafting and these kinds of things, or is that
Yeah.
something that is growing? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, most of my audience is male for the most part, which I kind of understand. Women pop in. I don't have a lot of women who are very chatty in the chat, um, because I think they're crafting with me.
Okay.
So that was the other reason I started that, because it occurred to me that like women used to get together and like craft together and like talk about things while they were knitting together or working on their different arts together, or like when they were washing clothes together they would chat about the children or things like that.
Mm,
Children, politics, whatever happened to come up. I'm sure they talked about a whole bunch of things.
yeah.
And I have been working on that IRL. It's just been going very slowly because COVID
Yeah.
is very frustrating if you're trying to build an IRL community.
I totally understand. I'm in the same boat. That's that's my own other stuff, but yeah, I feel like this is sort of a message that we kind of want to send out to our culture, is to just keep working on it, keep plugging away, in male and female, if you want to get some chickens, or you want to develop some kind of a skill for making your own stuff, or if it'd be hunting, or
And it's always one step at a time. Like, if you pick something up, you're not going to be a master tomorrow. And I think a lot of people get hung up on stuff like that too.
also, it's good if you have a friend or two in IRL, who you can do it with, because that just makes it a little bit easier. So I also wanted to ask you we can go in and out of these different topics, but on the show, I always like to ask people, how did they come to their racial awakening?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, well, first of all, getting punched in the face helped a lot.
Right.
I was literally punched in the face, so it was pretty hard to ignore.
Yeah.
I've never been punched by a white guy, ever.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
As a school teacher and dealing with these demographics, I've, seen a great deal of violence, and it's always the same demographic, and they love it. They thrill over cruelty. It's disgusting, and something that, every kind of white liberal should have to work in the ghetto schools for at least a month, and that will radically open their eyes and change their whole view of the world.
Yeah. Also, meeting Nick. So, this happened after I met Nick, but when I met my husband, he was red pilling me on the Federal Reserve, basically.
Okay.
And at the time, there was a huge surgence in who runs the media memes.
Yeah.
And so I kind of picked up on that. And at the same time, Nick was watching like feminist cringe compilations with me.
Okay.
And so cringe started out, I couldn't handle it at first. I really couldn't. I would have to like walk out of the room sometimes, like it wasn't funny. But eventually it like became funny. And then eventually I became really curious, how do these women get this way? So, like, the one thing that really sticks out in my mind was there was this one girl at a Milo Yiannopoulos event who threw a garbage can and hugged herself and just screamed as loud and as long as she could.
It's famous. I know the one. She's at a university. It's very disturbing.
Yeah, and I was like, what makes women act this way? Because I feel like this is really excessive.
Yeah.
I've never felt the need to do that in public. I mean, maybe personally I've like laid in bed and done that in my head or whatever, but like not in front of people.
Yeah, on camera.
What's
your take on that? Why? Like, how does that happen?
Well, interesting question. So that basically took me down the rabbit hole of where does feminism come from? I'll give you one guess.
I think our viewers know, and of course, but
so yeah, feminism what's the word? Derives from critical Western theory. Now, I think, everyone understands critical Western theory was created in order to deconstruct Western culture, Western nations, Western traditions. And feminism was really effective in the sense that it really put a wedge between men and women. And it's really important for men and women to work together.
Right.
Because now what that girl was displaying was her weaponized empathy. That is a girl who because she doesn't have children, she doesn't have somewhere to direct her empathy, right? She kind of broadly directs her empathy, and so when she sees that broad category of thing that she cares about potentially being challenged, then she has that response like, I can picture myself getting violent if someone was going to come after my child.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
So if you don't have a child, it's unconscious, but you kind of have to latch onto something to protect just because it's an innate drive in women to protect things.
I understand. Yeah.
So, all right, I'm glad I explained that appropriately.
Well, there's so many aspects to that. We could spend the whole show deconstructing feminism. I actually want to ask Nellis if he has a couple perspectives to share.
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes back to the issue of feminism. But before I say anything, I'm really sorry to hear that you had that experience, Kiz. It's
Horrible.
not a very fortunate experience,
I
even though,
appreciate that. It was necessary, but I appreciate that.
I mean, even though it might have had an ultimately positive result for you, still, I would not wish this on anyone. Um, it's very interesting though that you mentioned how empathy is then transferred into the abstract for a lot of people, and women in particular, when it comes to controlling emotion, right? And I'm not trying to suggest that women are more emotional than men, but they do have a more sensitive sense of empathy than men do, and that's primarily due to the fact that they are caregivers. They're the nurturers, right? They're the ones who raise the family in that sense, right? So they have that. So they have that deep emotional connection, and it's a necessity, if you will. And so, like, it's pretty sad when I see this. When I see a lot of different absurd and false representations of it, and especially if it's politicized and weaponized. And in that sense, do you feel, and I wanted to get back to a question to you actually, do you feel that through introducing a community of women, introducing things like various arts and crafts, that could be a way for maybe women outside our spheres who might be interested but are afraid to sort of engage in this whole community, to sort of bring them into it? Do you think that would be a way to kind of expand our spheres, if you will?
Kiz?
Yes.
Maybe okay. Didn't know if you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you hear my question? I'm sorry about that.
No, I didn't. I'm sorry to go.
It's all right. It's okay.
It's
Let me ask the
pregnancy
question.
issue.
Oh, no, not a problem. So I'll ask the question again. So
Okay.
do you think that by creating these communities where women can meet and learn arts and crafts, learn traditional values and traditional experiences with each other, that it could then help those who are outside of our spheres but interested, or maybe halfway interested in what we're doing, to sort of bring them closer to our spheres? I mean, would that be a way, do you think, that would work for them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not, right? That's pretty much what the left did. They got into the hobbies and then made them political.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. And this ties, by the way, Donald, into that question we always talk about with arts and crafts, folklore, folk dance, folk music.
Totally. Yeah.
What I noticed is that you have a lot of leftist elements that have infiltrated these circles. And so they've appropriated it in a way where that if you want to play, for example, some kind of a fiddle, or if you want to learn how to do some kind of a folk dance, then you're stuck with a community that's very leftist otherwise.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so their whole value system is skewed. But in a way, what they're doing is, and they might even be talented artists themselves, but their whole mentality is totally skewed. And you go into that community and you really can't find any camaraderie with them because you don't share their skewed false morality. And so, that's why it's very important for us to take this back and really recontextualize it into a more organic representation of our people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's an important thing that you're doing. And I encourage people in real life to form these communities and really get together if they can and do dances, get 4 people together and learn to play as a group, play folk music, or get maybe children together and start teaching them folk dances, or doing various kinds of arts and crafts together. Very important stuff.
Mm.
Yes. I would definitely say especially for children, because
Mm-hmm.
children need to be useful. We've like really lost this idea of I wish it would come back, and it's gonna sound terrible when I first say it, but I really wish it would bring back this idea of children as free labor.
Hmm.
Like people nowadays when they're I can't bring children into this evil world. It's like, please, the world is not any more evil than it's ever been.
Hmm.
It's not any more crazy than it's ever been. Maybe a different way. Different things are going on.
Hmm.
People were having kids during the Black Plague, during all the wars. It's, it's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
But what we have lost is like giving children usefulness. And I think
Hmm.
this has a lot to do with like media and stuff, because we're all, well, I guess I grew up with this idea that like children should have a phase in their life where they don't have any responsibilities. And now that I'm an adult, I think that is truly wrong,
Hmm.
because when you create a time in a child's life where they have no responsibilities, when they finally do take on responsibilities, they seriously resent it, and they spend the rest of their life being nostalgic for the time that they weren't. For example, all of these people who are obsessed with Harry Potter, they're obsessed with Harry Potter because it's nostalgic for a time where they weren't responsible for anything. And they're
Right.
like stuck in this time in their head. So I wish people would think of children as free labor. Like, I had a discussion with a woman who has a YouTube channel called Radical Mothering a few years ago. This woman has 6 children. When I was asking her about her chores, she was like, "Me doing chores? I have 6 kids. I don't do any chores." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's amazing."
Yeah, and it's funny because it ties into another topic that we've been talking about, which is this arrested development topic,
Yeah.
where you have these 30 to 40-year-old
Mhm.
children, I guess would be the proper term. So you have these
Toy boy.
children who, not soy boys, because the funny part about it is that people don't recognize how childish they are, and so you'll have like I mean, let's be honest, if you're 40 years old and you're still collecting, and again, I don't want to knock anyone, but I'm going to be very harsh about this one.
Mhm.
If you're 40 years old and you're still collecting Star Wars dolls, there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
There's something seriously wrong with that. And again, I'm not trying to knock anyone personally with it, but there has to be a point where the boy becomes a man, where the girl becomes a woman. There's no rite of passage anymore in our society, number one. And number two, there's also a lack of socialization. When I was growing up, I had to go to dance school, for example, when I was 13, 14 years old. And at first I hated it. But then, I was at that age, where I was turning and getting older, and the girls were getting more interesting and everything. So when you went to the dance school, you could learn to hold the girl's waist. That was such a big deal,
Ooh.
but it was a big deal because you also learned when you were dancing how to lead a girl in a dance, and it was a big deal.
Yeah.
All of these little things, rites of passage, these experiences that you have in that community growing up, it forges you into a man. And a lot of that has been taken away in today's society, where you have a lot of basically children, and men and female, male and female
Mhm.
children who are in their 30s, who, like you said, are obsessing about Harry Potter. Now, there's nothing wrong. I don't like Harry Potter per se, personally, but
Mhm.
there's nothing wrong about liking, a series of movies, or being a movie buff, or liking
Mhm.
a certain book, like fantasy novel collection or what have you. There's nothing wrong with liking it, but
Mhm.
there's a fine line between obsessing about it and liking it.
Mhm. Agree 100% on that.
If I can jump back a little bit to one
Mhm.
of the points you were making earlier, the feminism kind of targeting the connection between men and women, that is perhaps the most evil plot that you could think of, because it's stabbing right at the very heart of creation and life,
Mhm.
and it points out to us how absolutely sacred and critical the relationship of men and women really is. And in our time, it's so not that way. It's this kind of war of the sexes, and that, and there's so many dimensions of that, and people that kind of shill off of that, make money
Mhm.
off of how to the how to play the game, or all the hatred towards men, and even in, like, say, the divorce industry, and all these it's profound. And, you know,
Mhm.
while at the one hand we can clearly see, you know, the damage feminism does, it in a strange way also mirrors the importance of male and female harmony. And so I think this is another kind of question that our community has to focus on and work with, and do it in the arts, do it in the arts. That would be a great thing. So,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
was watching, I don't know if you guys have heard or know of this band from Russia called Pussy Riot.
it's like a sort of a fine art, not fine art, like a postmodern art performance group. Am I right?
Yep. The girl who runs it is a hyper feminist, like crazy intersectional feminist. And I was watching one of her videos and it struck me. I was like, oh my God, this is how feminism does it. Feminism convinces women that money equals power.
Mhm.
Because she kept saying, oh, the man goes to work and makes money, but the woman doesn't, so she has no power in the relationship. I was like, what the relationship between men and women is like if you actually believe that. Women have just as much power in a relationship as a man, and we don't need money to do it. And like Nullis was saying, you know, women raise the children. There's immense power in that. So
What?
the way White Rabbit Radio uh says it is that women have the power of running rabbits. If my husband comes home and I am like craving ice cream really bad, can you go get me some ice cream? He will do it, and I didn't have to use money as power to get him to do it.
Mm, mm, mm.
And so feminism convinces women that money equals power when that is so not true. That is like such a distortion. Women have immense amount of power in their personal relationships with their husbands, with their children, with their community. I mean, it's just like every president has a wife, right? Every king has a queen.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it's a big topic. It certainly is, and something we kind of muse on quite a lot. I did want to keep moving forward with learning more about you and your show. Also, you know, who are some of the people that you follow and admire?
all right, so I did mention already Mother Hen and White Rabbit Radio. Um, Mother Hen is someone I found a little while ago. I can't remember specifically. And I've chatted with her and I've listened to a lot of things that she has to say. And if you are unfamiliar, I really don't know how to describe her other than she is a homesteading wife. She has lots of children. As far as I know, they're looking to have more. She and her husband right now are literally building their farm. They purchased some property. They're building their homestead up. It's really cool. I'm not sure how much of it is public, so I'll just say that they're building their homestead. It's really awesome. And I learned from her a lot about the woman's role. So, like, for me, I grew up in the city, raised by a series of single mothers,
Yeah.
which isn't funny, but it's like none of them ever taught me how to be a woman because they were all like the feminist, strong woman, can do it myself.
Yeah.
Don't really need no man. Like, well, that's why they're single mothers. But anyway, so nobody really ever taught me femininity or like the woman's role.
Mm,
um
mm.
I was kind of just sort of, you know, I was a tomboy and sort of just left to my own devices, kind of.
Yeah.
It's really weird to think back on it now. I'm like wondering what were my parents ever doing, but
Yeah.
that's another topic. So anyway, when I started listening to a lot of what Mother Hen had to say, you know, she had this show where she would wake up before her husband. Oh, Morning Thoughts is what it was called. It was amazing.
Mm.
um, Very early in the morning, where she would talk a lot about what it means to nurture as a wife and a mother.
Wow.
And
Right.
that just like blew my mind. Every day she would, say something about like what a pleasure it was to wake up and be the first to be awake and like have yourself oriented for the day. Because if you're the first awake and you're setting everyone else up for the day, then you are setting the tone for the day.
Wow.
And as long as you can get yourself oriented towards like peace and calm,
Mhm.
you can orient everyone else towards having a successful day. And, because of that, I wake up before Nick every day and I make us both breakfast. And it is my favorite thing to do in the morning because I know that when he wakes up, he's going to have breakfast ready
Mhm.
and he's going to have his coffee. Everything is going to be exactly how he likes it. And I know that he's going to have the energy that he needs for the day. And you know how sometimes, like, if you wake up late and you're, like, feeling kind of off, and then, like, you try to make yourself breakfast, and, like, you have burnt toast, and you're like, oh my God, that's just how my day is going to be.
Right, right,
Well, if I can make sure that everything, almost every day, almost, can't promise every day, but I can do my best.
right.
If breakfast is one of those things that is not going to stress you out, then you're going to have more brain power to focus on other things and excelling and making better decisions in other areas of your life.
That is beautiful. That is so inspiring. And
Right? So that's what I got from Mother Hen. That's
that's great. Yeah, and it's interesting how people who grow up in these sort of I don't know how to explain it, but a kind of a broken culture where
Mhm.
we're severed from our past and these traditions and these roles, then you have to figure it out on your own. It's hard to do, and so I commend you very much in what you're accomplishing with that. That's great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's finding people who know more than me has been pretty much a mission of mine since I realized that I was not properly prepared for life.
Wow. Well, that segues really nicely into my next question. So, what role does your show or shows like yours have in media and in the arts? How does it play a role in the white positive sphere? Or maybe what is your intention for the show?
All right, so I have in my notes here for Cringe Bingo, I have my intent is for everyone, but women are a little more important in my scope, I suppose.
Mhm.
Revive women as the gatekeepers for standards of behavior and appearance.
Mm, mm.
Um, because women's judgment is very powerful. And you know this by all of the women on Twitter who are like, rejecting accepting other people's judgments as just, oh, you're just a hater, rather than maybe this person is legitimately criticizing something.
Right.
um and I think maybe online is not the best place to do it, because usually with people online it's a lot easier for them to reject the reality of what it is you're saying. But for example, I walked out of the store the other day and I saw like this, the only thing I can think to describe her as a mega Karen. Like,
Oh, wow.
she looked like the meme. She
Yeah.
had the hair. She looked angry, but she was like 400 pounds.
Okay.
And I was just like, oh my God. And, I used to like hide my reactions because I just like didn't want the confrontations, like a very feminine thing to like avoid confrontation. But since I've been thinking about like women being the gatekeepers of standards, I've stopped hiding my reactions to people and their behaviors in public.
Mm.
So when I saw that woman, I saw how fat she was, I looked her up and down, and I just laughed in her face.
Well,
And that's pretty rude, but it's also pretty rude to herself to gorge herself until she's 400 pounds. Like, what kind of health conditions does she have? Like, does she have children? She's gonna die before she meets her grandchildren. You know what I mean? So it, like, comes off as rude and mean, but in the long run, the perspective of it comes from a place of love. Like, I don't want people around me to be dying at 30 or 40 because they have heart disease, because they couldn't stop themselves from eating. They had no discipline. You know what I mean?
yeah, I kind of at a place where I feel pity for people who are in that phase, even for the people who make their whole life about criticizing others and policing others, etc. I,
Mm.
I- to be that heavy, I'll put it this way: anybody could try to imagine carrying around, say, 100 pounds, say in a backpack or something every day, and sleeping with it, and
Hmm.
trying to do any normal behavior with it, and the incredible discomfort that these people live with day in and day out. It's a hideous kind of cycle of depression plus eating plus depression plus eating, and they need help. But unfortunately, that the behavior that spins off of that tends to be very negative. And I think you get the picture of what I'm saying. But
Yeah, one thing that I have learned recently is that you can't help these people. They literally can only do it themselves.
what interests me is this concept of women kind of work. I don't know how to phrase this, but basically the sort of upholding certain standards among themselves. I'm sure men have something of, we're judgmental to each other in our own ways. I think power is more how we measure each other. uh,
Mm.
Whereas I'm not quite sure how women measure each other and sort of, quote, police each other. But I guess the question comes down to what is healthy for our community, for the white positive community,
What is healthy in what way?
in terms of like the way women interact with each other on things like body image and behavior.
Well, because it's like an internet-based thing, I would just say that like providing information, I mean, with each other and in our own groups, providing information and asking questions would
Mhm.
probably be the way to go about it, because there is a huge difference between the internet and real life. And I think that you as men understand that, because IRL, if you have an issue with someone, you always have that threat of physical violence to solve your problems, whereas on the internet, you don't have that.
Mhm.
Hmm.
You don't have that underlying threat of physical violence, so it tends to get a little catty, I've noticed, but regardless. Um,
Mhm.
so whenever I talk to women online, I generally try to frame questions in a way where I'm not blaming them for anything, and I'm trying not to make them feel like I'm accusing them of anything. So, for example, I'm in this women's group, and this one woman, well, actually watched the video of the murder of Ashley Bobbitt, and I asked her, why would you watch that? And she said, well, I wanted to have as firsthand experience with the situation as I could so I could explain it to others. And I said, all right, how does that, oh, what I said, at what cost? And
Yeah.
I don't want you to think I'm judging you,
Yeah.
but generally, things that are violent like that,
Mhm.
they make us angry and cynical, and they harden us to the world, which is typically better suited for men because men are just wired to handle that kind of imagery. Whereas we can handle that as women, but in times of need, like if our men are away and someone's attacking our village, then yes, we can pick up a sword and we can fight, and we can handle the blood and the emotional turmoil of possibly having to take a life to protect our children.
Mhm.
But if it's not in a life or death scenario like that, I think it's actually more hurtful, because it's like making you unnecessarily cynical to things in the world.
I understand.
Where like when you have children, like you don't really want to be cynical, because then you're gonna pass on
Right. Right.
that to them.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's intense stuff. People internalize violence in certain kinds of ways as well, and in some ways it desensitizes us. But I can't really, beyond the fact of like facing the tragedy and being able to say, protest against this tragedy and look for justice. I can't see any reason to want to watch somebody die in that manner. It's
Yeah.
horrifying.
Yeah.
Uh,
No.
Donald, if I can interrupt, yeah, I just wanted to mention that to the question of what role does your show Kiz and shows like yours have in our spheres, and I think that the message is understanding standards, elevating the right positive standards, by, either through humor or through action, like you would do with an arts and crafts show.
Mhm.
And you basically are celebrating the higher standard, as opposed to what we're doing in our society in general today is celebrating the grotesque. And so we're celebrating our failures in society in general. And what shows like yours, what the White Art Collective shows are trying to do, is trying to celebrate our success by elevating the standards, so that we all understand that even we're not perfect beings, but
Mhm.
we have something to strive toward. Gives us a higher moral standing in understanding ourselves. And I
Yeah.
think this is really an important point.
There's
The-
also the idea too that people run faster away from danger than they do towards something that's not dangerous.
right.
So by showing basically, sometimes I think of my show as like, now if you're not vigilant, this is how grotesque you'll be. And I feel like for a lot of young men, that's really motivational when they're laying, if they go to the gym, if they're laying on the bench and they have that one last rep and they're like, I can't do it, I can't do it. And then they think about some horrendous monstrosity they saw on my stream and they're like, you know what, if I don't do this, then that is a possibility in my future.
Exactly. And also for the men out there, we have to adhere to standards as well. We have to be self-sufficient before you get married. I mean, I'm not always the perfect example of everything. I'll be the first to admit that. But I also strive toward reaching a better self-awareness, being a better me, if you will. And that's a constant struggle. Even, if you're 20 or if you're 40 or if you're older, there's always a constant struggle to become a better person and recognize your shortcomings and your failures, and then dusting yourself off and then trying again. And I think this is an important message for the men, that when you have an attitude like that, that will be a lot more appealing, in my view at least, towards yourself, your own self-confidence. And when your self-confidence is stronger, that attracts the right woman.
Yes.
I would like to add to that that it's not all about your body. It should also be about
Hmm.
your mind and your spirit. And that, if anything, try to balance the efforts that you put in to those things.
Everything, yes, you're absolutely right. It applies to everything. How you dress as a man, how you behave as a man, not only formalities, but which are important, but also your honor, your honesty. A man is only as good as his word. Things like that. It goes far beyond the bench press. But of course,
Mhm.
be physically fit if you can. I mean, not everybody is going to be a bodybuilder, and nor should
Yeah,
we
that's fine.
expect that.
Right, right.
But what we should expect is at least a mindset that says, I want to be better than I am today. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I saw a great meme about this. Is an IQ bell curve, and at the low end, it was like lift weight, get strong, and
Yeah.
then in the middle, it was like some tweet that somebody made. Just think, for every weight they lifted, that was one poem they didn't read. And then on the high IQ spectrum, it was like God has created my mind and my body to work together, so I must make my mind and my body stronger together.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of one of the takeaways from this show, and the theme of Imperium Art in general is essentially we artists and content creators are trying to help to design our culture and design our future. And that comes down to these type of activities, the crafts, how well you take care of yourself, your roles as males and females. So I think that kind of wraps things up really beautifully with like the theme of this show, and gives the audience something to take away as well as something to respond to in the comments below as well. But I did also want to ask you, Kiz, if you could give some advice to people, specifically women, if they would
Mhm.
like to start a show on DLive or anywhere, kind of help them get a bit of a jump start through your learning curve.
Sure. So my first suggestion would be to look up the Red Ice video, The Truth About Trad Wives.
Mm.
because um, I had a little dissonance at a time because I am a particularly aggressive female. Like I said, I was a tomboy, so I was also the only girl in my age group in my family, so surrounded by boys, you know, playing football and stuff like that. I was, you know, generally aggressive and very boyish.
Mhm.
Um, and then, you know, with the guidance from Mother Hen, I was going more towards the like trad wife meme type thing. And so I was having some dissonance because it was like I want to be this perfect trad wife for my husband that I can be, but I'm also like aggressive and somewhat crass sometimes. I mean, we do have a show called Monday Night Shitpost where, you know, we
Yeah.
make jokes. Sometimes they're a little off color.
Mhm.
Um, and so I was having this dissonance about how do I make both of these things work at the same time. It
Mhm.
was like, yeah, I was like chasing the meme almost, like
Mhm.
the 1950s housewife. I want to be like this perfect,
Yeah.
you know. And then Lana came out with that video about the truth about trad wives, and it was so eye-opening.
Okay.
Is realistically the meme of a trad wife boils down to a woman fits into what her husband needs,
Mhm.
or women fit into what their communities need. And that's not a one size fits all. Not every trad wife is going to look like the 1950s housewife.
Mhm.
It's just impossible. All men are different. You know, men are different, women are different.
Right.
And so when you get together, you're going to have different strengths and weaknesses. And women are really good at kind of molding themselves to fit their strengths into their husband's weaknesses, if that makes sense. So
Wow.
if you find a particular thing difficult, your wife, because she is loving and nurturing, will typically tend to do what she can to make it easier for you to deal with that weakness.
That's really beautiful and powerful. I always see the trad wife meme as only half the truth, meaning that men play an equal role in that whole, I don't know, that structure. And that in a sense, you have to also earn her loyalty. And if she's going to be so nurturing and you know, all these things that is a trad wife, that
Mm.
you should be worth it, you know, you know, in all your ways, in all the ways that a man should be. So it's really just returning to tradition. That's what it
Yeah.
all boils
And
down.
then after you watch that video, just think about like, what are your strengths,
Mhm.
right? And how do you have fun playing on your strengths? So, I've always made fun of people. It's, you know, not a very feminine quality. But I've just always had fun making fun of people, and I've always been really clever and good at it. So I figured, you know, this is something that I've always done, something that I've kind of always enjoyed doing. It sounds terrible when I say it out loud like this, but with the basis of understanding with all of the gatekeeping of standards and all of that, it makes a little bit more sense. And so why not use my strength to um, help a community, or help a community of people, or help my husband?
Right, right. So this is the part of the show where we switch it over and we ask you, our guests, to respond to Imperium Art, uh, the,
Okay.
the series and the essay. Um, what are your thoughts on Imperium Art?
First of all, I think your goal is extremely noble and it's beautiful and amazing. After I read it, I was like, oh, they just want to make art again because art has been lost. A lot of it has been lost. I remember being in middle school or whatever, learning about Renaissance artists. Or was it Renaissance? I can't remember. I remember this particular story where some artist, and now that I have racial awareness,
Yeah.
I can probably figure out what kind of artist they were.
Mhm.
But this one artist decided to rip a urinal out of a bathroom and put it on display in an art show and
Marcel
stood.
Duchamp. Marcel Duchamp, but go on.
Oh, you know, okay.
Yeah.
And stood around the corner and snickered as people were talking, oh, this is such grand art. The poop around the ring represents the degeneracy and the disgustingness of society. And realistically, it didn't mean anything. It was just a toilet ripped out of the floor.
Yeah, that's kind of the birth of postmodernism in many ways. But yeah, that's great. I feel like noticing these things is the beginning, and then there's just not enough literacy about art history. You know, a lot of times people look at our history and they think, why do I have to learn this? What's this about? It's history through art.
Hmm.
I mean, the arts alone are great in so many ways. But if you're looking back at Western civilization and our history, it's a document of that. They didn't have, film and photography and etc. So it's extremely rich. And I feel that literacy in the arts and art history specifically is really key.
Yeah, well, what did you write here? That I absolutely love this. Our contemporary civilization has lost its ability to produce meaningful expressions of the human condition, as it has been sucked into a void where countless reincarnations of materialism and secularism flounder in apathy and egoism. I could not think of a more concise way to explain what modern art is, and I really applaud you for wording it like
Yeah.
that.
Nullis has to
Thank
take the
you.
credit, and that's Nullis's essay. But do you want to expand on that a little bit, Nullis?
Well, I mean, it's a concise sentence, right?
Yeah. What more can you say?
What more can I say?
Yeah.
No, it's really the way I feel about a lot of things. I think that egoism, nihilism, and materialism are the most destructive elements in our society today, and that ties into almost every topic that you can think of,
Mhm.
whether it's the social interaction between men and women, whether it is the way this arrested development topic that we talked about earlier. All of this ties into some form of materialism, nihilism, or egoism. And I think that the postmodern condition is reflective in that. And I think that this is all reflected in the art that's being produced out there. So I think that would be the best way to kind of expand on that one sentence.
Beautifully said.
Yeah, that was
Well,
so awesome.
we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share your experience and your thoughts on all these things. Where can people find you online?
Oh, sorry. I just like I printed out the whole thing and I made notes everywhere. But I did also want to say I really liked how Nullis pointed out that there's no imagination in stories anymore.
Right.
And you referenced J.R.R. Tolkien because he was the founder of the style of world building, where he created stories with extreme and intricate details without actually taking away from the story. I remember trying to read that when I was a younger teen. I don't know, I was like 11 or 12. Maybe my brain just wasn't developed enough to appreciate that kind of writing, but I found the too much detail to be quite boring. Now, I had, I have an imagination. I played outside as a kid. So I found when I read stories that are too descriptive or never ending, I find them to be really boring because I picture things how I picture things, and you could spend 20 pages describing it, and it's just not going to change the picture I have in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And with your references to Harry Potter, it's like a never-ending story, right? There's so many people who have no imagination, and it's really obvious because every time she comes out with another work of fiction that just further explains the world in which Harry Potter exists in, you're taking away the mystery of it, you're taking away the imagination of it. And that was always my favorite thing about reading books as a kid, is the whole point is character development. That is the story.
Right.
And not having character development and having all of these other details, it's not a story anymore. You're just describing things, and that's kind of boring.
Yeah, I wanted to maybe draw a distinction between Tolkien and Rowling.
Yeah.
It's actually a very interesting distinction. So world building in and of itself, I think, is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, you will have people that want to understand what's happening outside the story, and I get that. I think that can be interesting when you focus on lore and various other topics. So you'll have stories within stories and things like that. That in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing.
Hmm.
The problem I see And I agree with you, by the way, when they go a little overboard with it, it does tend to get a little repetitive and boring if they don't do it right. And so what I want to say though is that I think that Tolkien drew a distinction between world building and the story that he was saying. So there was, in other words, the world building was more ancillary to him than the focus. And then now, you know, you have with the Harry Potter series, and even if you look at the Game of Thrones series, all of these different stories, it's the story itself, the character itself, the character development, the cathartic experience that you might receive during, you know, reading a story, right? All of that is lost through the world building. And I think that's the problem that I see. Although I do believe that Tolkien made, at least in my opinion, Tolkien was very good at both storytelling and world building. And I think very few people are good at both, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, with the whole like Game of Thrones and Harry Potter thing, it seems like it has storytelling has become like reading and ingesting stories has become a
Exactly.
form of escapism rather than an avenue of introspection and exploring your own empathy.
I think I might have,
Exactly.
I think I might have an insight on that. So, you know, if you're learning how to write, you have character-driven stories and plot-driven stories. And there's almost, it seems that there's just a huge emphasis on character-driven, you know, how somebody changes through a crisis or how a situation, you know, affects a person, how they get through, you know, whatever the drama is. Perhaps maybe the more plot-driven stories where it's not about the characters and their personal journeys and whatnot, but how a situation plays out. That could perhaps, you know, be a new direction for, say, writers in our sphere, especially since the paradigm seems to be all about world building and fantasy, escapism. What about turning it into realism and plot? You know, we're in a very crazy situation in America right now here on the 7th
Well,
of January. You know, this is a plot, right? A situation that we're trying to get through. Go ahead.
you know, the thing is, though, that I have to do a little pushback here, Donald, only because world building is plot, basically. So that's the problem with world building, that you have a plot, but there's no way for the audience to identify themselves within that plot. And that's why you need the characters involved in the story so that you can identify with the character who's in that particular circumstance or that journey that they're going through. And so, you know, this is an age-old kind of
Debate.
conversation,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah,
But
I see it as events and how events unfold and then characters
right.
respond. And
So you want to be able, as a reader, to identify with what's going on, right? And that's a very important part of it.
Mm. Is there anything else you want to comment on, Kiz, regarding the Imperium Art project?
Yes. The essay itself, I really like how Nullis brought up architecture. If anyone in your audience hasn't explored this, it is definitely worth exploring the differences in architecture between, well, the height of European greatness and now, because it's a beautiful visual representation of basically what most of your essay is trying to get at, where like when we are connected with ourselves and we are connected with God and we have higher things than ourselves to believe in and are driven towards, we create beautiful things. You know, the
Yes.
Notre Dame, for example, and it took so long to do, but we were so driven and we were so inspired by the beauty and truth and all of these positive things about God. And then you look at, you know, modern architecture and it's just so soulless and square and cement.
Yes. And there's also the generational aspect of, right, the great cathedral theme, where one generation builds the foundation, the next generation builds a certain aspect of the cathedral, and it goes on through the generations. So there's a calling for everyone to participate in the construction of this building, if you will. So there's a lot. And not only that, if you go back in history, you know, you'll have old buildings that were basically constantly renovated and changed and upgraded. because they took care, but they did it in a way where they didn't destroy the old, they added to the old. And in
Mhm.
modern and this postmodern world, what they do is they demolish the old and then they build something completely new, which generally is not as aesthetically pleasing, in my opinion, as the old. But again, we can talk about severed ties and things like that, of course, as well.
Well,
Yeah, I've been
you
thinking
know,
a lot about time preference lately in regards to that. Like you're talking about one generation building the foundation, the next generation working a little more. I think,
Hmm.
again, having grown up in the city, raised by a single mom, my dad was there too. It's a complicated story, but single mothers are part of the picture. Anyway, um, time preference is one of those things that has been like really chipped away, um because of smartphones, technology, feeling disconnected from our roots and the genders from each other. um it seems to me like a lot of people don't make generational plans anymore,
Yeah.
and we absolutely need to get back to that, because I think that's a lot of where our strength lies. And I think that's where our strength lies because that's what was broken down.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
when they sever your continuity, then you have no continuity. You have nothing to draw. There's no wellspring to draw from. So you're starting from scratch, and then that means that the next generation has to start from scratch, and so on and so forth. So
Mhm.
and that's a nihilistic approach to life. That's a very uh, empty path. But if you have, and that's one of the goals of Imperium Art is to reconnect these severed ties with our continuity, because by reconnecting these severed ties, we understand the full complexity of our collective experience from antiquity to today. And that's a very important thing. It gives us strength. It
Mhm.
makes us understand that that there are things that are greater than us that we need to work toward. And I think that that's an important part of this message, at least for Imperium Art.
any other comments on the essay, Kiz, or the topic in general?
Uh, I'll let it go. I printed it
It's
out and
okay.
wrote notes all over it, but it would be like a 3-hour discussion on its own.
Is there,
Well, that's wonderful though. And, by all means, if you have any comments, you're always willing and welcome to share them. And so please do.
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
indeed. Thank you so much for joining us today. So one more time, where can people find you online?
Yes, if you go to DLive or Twitter and you type in Kiz Kardassian, I know it's not on the screen, but Kardassian, I should come up. I am verified on DLive, not on Twitter. My Twitter is pretty small. My aim with the Twitter is there's a lot of angry people. There's a lot of black-pilled people on Twitter, so
Yeah.
I kind of try to just go on there and showcase like self-improvement and motivational things without being cheesy.
Cool.
Because it's just I
And,
did want to talk a little bit about propaganda. Not all propaganda is bad,
yeah.
and you got to be careful about what propaganda you ingest. So this is another reason why I adore the White Art Collective, because it's positive propaganda.
Oh yeah. Right.
And we need as much positive propaganda to combat the negative, because there's a whole world of negative propaganda out there. And it's really easy to get sucked into it.
Mm.
And uh it's really tough to get out once you've been sucked in. So try to I try to tell people, like, you can't get sucked in by all of this negative stuff, because it's so hard to crawl out of it. Plus, when you're talking about like black pilled sentiment, and this is why I love Aisha Logos. If you haven't heard of him, definitely look him up on YouTube, BitChute.
Mhm.
um the black pill was created by our enemies to keep us from fighting. You don't have to fight an enemy who refuses to pick up the sword. Not that any one of us are actually saying to pick up a sword and physically fight, but the fighting that I'm talking about is like self-improvement. If you feel like there's no future, there's no point in doing anything, you're not going to get up and go to the gym and, read a couple of chapters in a book.
Right. That's nicely said. That's actually a really good cap off here, because that echoes themes we've been talking about throughout the show. So appreciate that very much. So yeah, please go check out Kiz Kardassian's DLive show and enjoy it. And once again, thanks again to Nullis for sharing his insights. And thank you to the audience for spending time with us today. Take care.
Thank you.